Welcome to Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a weekly podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Join me, Randy Cantrell, and my co-host Dennis Simpson as we discuss the history, facts, people, places, events, lots more surrounding Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. Visit the website at hotspringsvillageinsideout.com. I'm tired of the intro. I'm tired of the intro. No, it's already begun. I'm not going to edit anything. I'm just glad everybody's here. And it is Hot Springs Village Inside Out. HotSpringsVillageInsideOut.com is the website. I already said that in the voiceover. So, no, I was thinking, okay, we need to switch it up. But anyway, I didn't. So we've got a young person with us.
Young person?
And I can't be happier. Plus, he's got a drum set behind him, and no, we're not going to ask him to play it, but glad that he's here. Dennis R. Simpson, you can take it from here. Well, I'm botching it already.
A drum set behind you infers cool. Now, you may not be cool, but it infers or implies cool. That's my theory, right?
It's true. I also have a keyboard behind me with Learning Keyboard for Adults that I've literally never opened, and I've never used it.
For those of you who don't know, it is our pleasure and our delight. Hot Springs Village Inside Out. I'm Dennis Simpson. That's Randy Cantrell. And we are with Mr. Chris Jones today. You thought I was going to mess that up too, didn't you, Randy? You thought I was.
You nearly did.
I nearly did. Anyway, Chris Jones has the same big head, I think that's the exact word you used, and the same beard-like characteristics of his father, who is?
Greg Jones.
Greg Jones. Famous entrepreneur and basically, you know what people don't understand? Greg's a fun guy. He's funny. He really is. He's a lot of fun.
And we are unabashed fans, by the way.
We are. If you can make us laugh, we're there.
No, we're fans. Well, if you can provide great food and make us laugh, I mean, it's a win-win.
That's true. And great business acumen. So, Chris, how on earth do you get to this place? Let me back up here and tell a story.
How do you get from Plano, Texas to Hot Springs Village?
I gotta interject a story first. So I'm DJing the 4th of July show for your dad at the beach, and it was a blowout great time. What was it? Bad Habit was the band playing. It was a great setup, tons of great food, hot dogs, burgers, tacos, you name it. You were at the ice cream booth, if I'm not mistaken.
I was running ice cream.
Yeah, and I remember that during that time, Greg came up to me and he said, a lady just came up to him and said, there was a lady on the beach with a real tiny bikini, smoking cigarettes, and she had tattoos. And she obviously couldn't be from the village because nobody in the village had tattoos, smoked cigarettes, and wore tiny bikinis. And your dad said, no, she's really from here. She's really from here. So the stereotype is that we're all 60 plus Karens screaming at people in the yard to get your kids out of the lawn, but we don't have that many kids. But we're not all that way. Matter of fact, some of us are younger. Chris, if I'm not mistaken, I believe, to my knowledge, in the last 20-something years that I've been here, I believe you are the youngest member of the board in Hot Springs Village that I know of.
I'm pretty sure that's accurate. I think the next above me was like 42, something like that.
And you're how old?
I am 33.
And you're about to be married to your lovely bride, I believe. Your
bride to be. A little bit less than a month away.
Yeah. So I see drums in the background. I see keyboards. There's a mixed story from Plano, Texas to Hot Springs Village, Arkansas. How do you get there? What do you do?
Well, you have family that moved here. That was part of it, right? So, they purchased a lot about 2006. I was in high school. So I would come up here with them and we would come just for Christmas, Thanksgiving, typical holiday fashion. And I've always loved coming here because it's very serene, very peaceful, driving down DeSoto. Sometimes you get stuck behind a train of cars, but for the most part, there's no traffic. And you look out and you see all this greenery, these trails, you see wildlife. I see the deer at night, which sometimes is not a good thing, but it's nice. And so once I had the opportunity to work from home full time, I thought, hey, my parents are already there. instead of having to travel to visit them all the time. I love the scenery. I can work from my basement. Why don't we find a house out there and move out? And that's exactly what we did.
Now, what kind of job? When? Yeah.
That was last October, so about a year.
So you've been here, hang on, less than a year, and you're on the board?
Yeah, I guess fortuitous time. Well, I don't know if I call it fortuitous timing, but the timing as I came in here was basically setting up for the board candidacy. And I was talking to some other folks I know around here and talking to my parents. And we were sitting around one day and I said, I think I read through these Facebook threads and it sounds like the younger population that's here gets really disenfranchised. They don't have anybody that speaks for them, and everything is really posited for the elderly or the senior folks. And everyone said, that's a good point. Why don't you run for the board? And I thought, oh, why don't I? And so I did, and I ended up being the top voted candidate, which was pretty interesting itself. So I think that speaks to the mentality that people have around here, that a younger person can bring some perspective and can bring new thoughts and new ideas and really try to push the board and the POA in directions they've never been pushed before.
Well, and I tell you what, and I want to say this up front, I am so excited about this. Has been a conversation I've looked forward. I know, Randy, we record a lot of shows. This is one of my top 5 I've looked forward to, sincerely. So many things. I know you have a corporate background. I know you still work for a corporation. Yes. And I understand you coming from that background, you have to walk into the POA with an active job, as none of the other board members have, and walking in and going, why are we doing that way? Why, the corporate world wouldn't do that way. Why are we doing that? That doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just, that's the question, right? It begs a good question. So let me back up just even a little further. What kind of business do you do? How can you work from home? Tell me your demographic and your profile. I mean, look, Greg and your mom didn't call and say, oh, we got to have you here now. This is your own decision, of course, right? I mean, you came here because you wanted to.
Exactly. Yeah. So my background is all in software. So I work for a global payroll HR software company named Ceridian. And I run their data and analytics product set. So I'm very data and analytic oriented, which is why I always talk about metrics and different results and things like that with the board. But in working in software these days, you don't need to be at an office desk. You don't need to have your butt in the chair, as it were. I can work at my own pace, which really allows me to be on the board. If there's a meeting that we have to have, 3:00, an information session, or if we need to, do a forum or something like that, I can make myself available as long as they, give me some time. There have been cases where they just spring things on me and I'm like, I can't because you didn't warn me. But for the most part, my schedule is flexible. But, all in all, I do think that I can bring that expertise that I currently have to the board. And it is different, running a POA versus working in a corporate job. There are differences, but for the most part, it all is leading to the same way. You have a budget, you have some goals, you have a strategy, you need to align those together, and you need to track how you're doing. So I bring all of that to the table whenever I'm, talking about the budgets or talking about things we're working on.
And Randy, I know you're dying for questions, so I was being quiet for a moment because I know you got some. I know.
Well, I told Chris before we hit the record button, I'm the guy that I watch the POA board meetings and whatnot. And as a guy that coaches leaders, particularly CEOs and top level, including city managers, the thing that I appreciate is the curiosity. And I'm 64 and I'm probably more curious than I was, Chris, when I was your age. And I was really curious then, because you get to be my age and you realize how much you don't know. When I was younger and you kind of thought you knew, but you weren't really sure. Well, now I'm pretty sure. Now I'm really sure that I don't know, which makes me ask even more questions, so, and I don't care about the politics, but a group dynamic, whether it's your collaboration on the day job or the collaboration with the board, and our ability to ask those questions, our ability to have enough humility to fuel the curiosity, because in my world, that's the enemy. The enemy is pride and arrogance. The enemy is, I already think I know the answer. Okay, but what if you don't know the answer? I don't know. I'm curious your point of view. I'm curious your life perspective. Work, POA, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I really I embrace that curiosity as well. There's actually a show on Apple called Ted Lasso about a football coach that ends up coaching soccer in England. And he has a whole speech about being curious. And that really resonates with me. I really like to ask the questions and try to find out the why. That's a big thing in both my personal life and in my professional life. I really want to understand, well, why are we doing it that way? Or what are we trying to find as the outcome here? And why are we trying to find that as the outcome? That's really inherent to my lifeblood, I guess. And, that drives me.
When you moved to the village, what's been the biggest surprise? Because you already had some history and you already had some perceptions. Any one thing stand out is, okay, well, I didn't quite see that coming. As being a resident there now?
I will say, as much as I already knew that things were 30 minutes away for the most part, it really dawns on you when they're actually 30 minutes away all the time. So that was a big one for sure.
Each way, 30 minutes going and 30 minutes coming. Right?
Exactly. So that was a big one. And really the engagement of a lot of the population here. I didn't realize that people were so invested in the politics, as it were. So that was kind of eye-opening as well.
In my mind, I'm just thinking of a million questions. I mean, hey, I'm going to pick up, move everything. The only people I know in this town basically are my mom and dad, of sorts. And we're going to pick up and move out there and then get married and buy a house, or get my house and get married and make our new lives here. And we're going to be, I don't know, 8% of the population, 5% of the population that's in the 30s, right?
And your peers in Dallas-Fort Worth said?
Well, their first thing was, why would you move out there? And I said, I can live here with my neighbor right on top of me and have the Whataburger down the street, which I dearly miss Whataburger. It's a huge loss for me. But you don't get the same sense of, I don't know, it's just like a sense of peace here with the trees. And I have a nice view, and there's lakes that we can go swim in. You just don't have those things. And if you do, you paid a lot of money for it. And to come here was really not that much of a stretch for something that we were looking for. And we were looking for that peace.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It's a peace and quiet thing. Mm-hmm. And I hear people also, I love the hustle and bustle of the city. Maybe this isn't for you. This may not be, because you got 30 minutes to good sushi and back, right?
Right, exactly. And you can visit cities. It's not like you're locked here forever. So it's kind of like pick what you're going to visit, right? Before it was hustle and bustle all the time, visit the peace. Well, we flipped it and said, well, we want peace most of the time, and we'll just visit the hustle bustle.
But an awful lot of people in your generation, Chris, have joined those ranks. I mean, there is a boatload of online information, including data, of people in your generation that are making the same decision that you're making, and small towns all over the country are even providing bounties to try to lure your demographic to their community. So there's something to this. And as an old guy here, speaking even for Dennis,
couple of old guys,
I super admire, and I'm envious that at 33, that you've got the opportunity, and B, you had the wisdom and the foresight to make the decision that I don't know that I would have made at 33. Mm-hmm. So hats off.
And I want to come back to the wisdom, and I'm with you. I thoroughly respect you for this, Chris. And there's a reason why you're on our podcast. We didn't just throw darts at the wall and go, "Oh, look, Chris Jones," one of the things that goes through my mind, and I wanted to address this may be the elephant in the room, but we're going to get over that. Anybody who thinks that you're on the board because you're going to do what your dad says and you're just his minion, they don't know you very well. And they certainly don't know your dad very well. I mean, anyway, I've heard that rumble about, and I'm like, that is just such absolute junk. Yeah. Anyway, Chris, comment.
I mean, there's a huge reason why I don't work in the food and beverage industry with my dad. And it's the fact that I just wouldn't be able to work with him. We would have difference of opinions on a lot of things all the time. So working with family, not a big thing I want to do. But yeah, I am my own person. He doesn't need to tell me what to do. I know what I feel is right. And I know what I feel is right for, pushing forward in the village. So whether he agrees with me or not, it doesn't matter.
And it's not like you've got anybody's got unilateral power anyway, right?
That's true. I mean, there's 6 of us, right?
So there's that, which social media tends to forget, I think.
Yeah, everybody gets amnesia when it comes to that detail. And I know that you're your own person. I wish other people recognize that too. And Randy's point is completely, I mean, you're 1/6 of the vote. You're not the entire vote. That's insane to even think that but I think you touched on it, Randy. It's one of those, when the Karens get together and decide that, they've got an idea about how things are done. And what's the most surprising thing? Let me tell you, I've had many people ask me, hey, you're outspoken and you seem to know a lot about the village. Why aren't you on the board too? Which is, code for it. You should be burned out too. And right. Is that, no? One of the things that I didn't want to put up with was the endless emails from people that were, I don't like the term no intelligence, low education, or uninformed. We'll go, and I'm not exaggerating that at all. I mean, there's a lot of uninformed people who say, well, our city we're not a city, I mean, simple, basic, fundamental questions. The emails that you and the board get, there's frustrations. Did you expect that? Is that about where you thought it was, or what?
I mean, people do send emails. They're frustrated, or they're always offering advice from what they believe is the right thing to do.
Sure.
And I will say that one thing that does surprise me is there's not as many emails as people think.
Really?
So maybe that's a kudos to this current board, and maybe we are doing, the right things and pushing the right directions, but yeah. It's relatively not as bad as people made it out to be as I was running for candidates.
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Right.
Perception and reality are two different things.
Well, and the people that told you how terrible it was they weren't on the board at that time. Is that correct?
That is true.
I'm just making an observation if I can. So challenges that you expected on the board, challenges you didn't expect?
One of the biggest things that people kept harping on was the fact that I have a job. How could you be on the board? It's a 40-hour-a-week board position. How are you going to do that with a job? If it's a 40-hour-a-week board position, then those people need to be paid. Yep. They need to have titles. Like, that's not what the board is for. The board is for advisory, governance, and really helping set the strategy forward. That's it. And I think the other fellow board members all also believe that. And that's why we don't spend 40 hours a week doing board activities, because we don't need to.
Well, unless somebody was born in the village and they've never lived anywhere else, then I can promise you that every community that they came from had a city council, and those people had jobs. And Exactly. Many of them were like your father. They were entrepreneurs. They ran their own companies, which didn't mean they had 40-hour-a-week jobs. They had 60, 80-hour-a-week jobs. So that's how it rolls. But the fact that you've made the investment to be there, I mean, this for me as an outsider who's clamoring to become an insider one day, and I'm super green with envy, and look at a 33-year-old guy who's made the move, who's got a fiance that's a month away from marriage and starting his own family, and has made the financial investment and the time investment to serve on the board. I can't get my head wrapped around the fact that you've got the future in mind. or you wouldn't be doing any of this.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I think I've probably expressed that in certain board meetings as well. But for some people, they think of the future here as 10, 15 years. The future here for me is 50. So, it's a drastically different perception when people are saying, oh, we don't need all these roads. We don't need all these things. Why are you spending the money on roads? Wow. I would like the roads. I'm going to be using them for the next 50 years.
I was a Jack Welch fan, Chris, and I had a good friend who was an upper exec at GE. And so years ago, and I was a client, and years ago, Jack Welch came to the Galleria and he held a really small thing. Herb Kelleher was alive and it was running Southwest Airlines. And so I got an invite, and there were maybe 20 of us that went to meet Jack, and he talked to us. And he said, Kelleher asked him about strategic planning. He said, and I already knew this because I had read everything the man had ever said or written, we're trying to see what the competition can do in the next 18 months to nail us to the wall. And then we're trying to figure out what we can do in the next 18 months to nail them to the wall. But he said, I'll tell you really what we're doing. He said, you go to Japan, and if they want to build a high-speed rail, and we want to build a high-speed rail, we immediately in America think engine. I mean, how can we have, and of course, GE was big in the locomotive business at the time, may still be. They've fallen on hard times. But he said, we're thinking about the engine. What engine would propel a train 200 miles an hour? He said, you go to Japan, they're not thinking about the track. They're thinking about the bed that the track goes on. What kind of a bed, what kind of foundation would the track have to be on to carry people safely at 200 miles an hour? Point being, real long-term thinking versus real short-term thinking, which I do think, as a guy who's watched all the meetings, and I'm not saying that the other members don't, because you guys seem to be a group that basically is a kind of a cohesive and work together well. And that doesn't mean everybody sees it the same way. In fact, better if you don't. Yeah. Serves everybody better for different perspectives and points of view. But that long-term thinking that your demographic brings to the party is, I know is invaluable. Whether other people do, that's their problem. I got my own perspective, and I happen to be right about this.
It's not your fault. You're right, Randy. It's not your fault. Really, it's not.
Yeah.
No, if I could be fair, I've seen that Japanese structure before, and it's not just in projects. It's in stock. The Japanese are very critical of our stock market, justifiably so, because we're focused on the next quarter. They're focused on the next 20 years. And Chris, your point's extremely well taken. And as a person, I think the Future Funding Task Force may have needed to have put you into the mix more, because as somebody who's going to use the roads more, I think maybe you need to be paying more. Is what I'm thinking for the POA dues. Maybe we should raise your rate. You young kids should pay more because you're going to use the roads longer.
Yeah, exactly. And then you run all the young kids out. Then what do you have?
A lot of old people who scream at the Karens
with no roads.
With no roads.
Seriously, as a young guy, what do you see as the future inside the village?
That's a very good question. I think the future is very undetermined at this point. It's very ambiguous, mainly because, one, you have somebody like myself that's trying to push forward for new things, or different ways to approach things. You have folks like my dad that are trying to reinvigorate the restaurant community within here. I think the trajectory that Hot Springs Village was on 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, that path is completely diverted now. And I honestly don't know where we're headed, but
well, describe what that path was. What was that path?
I mean, I think it was just maintain, stabilize as cheap as you can, and just keep going. I think that's what the plan was. You can't do that forever. We know that now. We knew that then. We knew that 30 years ago. I mean, there comes to a point where you're just sinking money for no reason. There's no gain to it. So, I mean, I think the the new trajectory, like you said, more young people are moving here. There's different ideas. You have folks like with tattoos sitting at the beach that people are like, oh, I've never seen somebody like that before. There's a new way of thinking entering the village. And I think that will help drive a new path that we've never been on before.
Well, being the old guy here again, me and Randy, back in the late 1990s, probably 98, 99, I met a lady named Modine Sproul, who is still a realtor with RE/MAX. She was working with Cooper at the front gate at the time. Really nice lady. And I asked, I said, what's happening to the real estate market? And she said, now this is late 90s. She said, boy, we are having such a boom with all these golden parachutes. People that are being paid to retire. Randy's got that wry grin. Yeah.
Yeah. People well, I didn't get one.
Yeah, I didn't either. I think mine had a hole in it. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. I'd be looking
to see Social Security.
Yeah. I think I just got thrown out of the plane.
Maybe you can fly, Randy. Try this, right? Yeah. No, the reason I bring that up is because we've had these waves. This is not a new thing. This is not uncommon. If you say this is new, you've never studied history before. This new generation of a different group. And thank you, Jesus, literally, for good internet in great places. I mean, I've been very frank. Diane and I we have some lots over on Geronte, not far from where you are, Chris, and which is over on Lake Lago, the water supply lake. And we toured around and I went by and I went, oh, that's Chris's house. I didn't know at the time or whatever. And I realized that was the area. And as I drove past, I was like, man, they have a stunning view out kind of to the southeast, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I just thought, and don't mean this wrong, that view in Dallas, or if it was, or in any major city, would be a $500,000 view.
More than that.
It really would. Do I?
That wouldn't touch
more
it.
More than that.
That wouldn't touch it.
Really?
Yeah. It would be way more than that.
Yeah.
I got to ask, in my mind, I'm trying to picture this. You're in high school. Mom and dad are driving through. They don't have 7 or 8 restaurants at the time or whatever, and he's still at Texas Instruments at the time. Is that right?
Yes, he was.
And you're at high school. And don't get me wrong. I know how this works. You didn't just go, okay, I'm 31 and I think I'm going to move to the village. You were driving through as a kid going, man, this place is pretty. This is quiet. I mean, tell me your impressions.
I mean, that's exactly right. Like I mentioned before, it's just that sense of peace you get here. I think being surrounded by trees is something that I never experienced as a kid growing up in Dallas. It seems like anywhere there's something green in Dallas, they say, tear it down and build apartments. So it's a different experience to be able to come to a place that has the greenery and the nice natural amenities that you don't get to experience in other ways. Or if you do, you had to travel significantly further to get there. This was only a 5-hour drive. That's very convenient for us, right? And my dad always liked to put it that, it's the closest you can drive to get a view. And I think he was right. I mean, it was close. It's drastically different in comparison. My whole life, I've always been coming here and thinking that same thing. And my fiance, Hannah, and I were sitting here last June and we were having a coffee out on mom and dad's patio, listening to the birds, watching the sunrise. We were like, why don't we just move here? We both love it here. Why don't we just move here? And that was the kicker.
Yeah, I was going to ask what her input was, but you just answered it. So,
yeah, I was going to ask if that sounds familiar, Randy.
Yeah, exactly the same thing. I told Chris before we hit record, my first foray was to rent Dennis's place in 2018, and my wife, we'd never heard of the village. Mm-hmm. I had no idea. I was looking for a completely different change in topography, and I wanted hills, and I wanted trees, and I wanted what the village has got. Yep. And I pull in and I'm like, how have I not heard about this place? And of course, I have since found out that about half of DFW is over there, or they come visit. So it is kind of the it's kind of the refuge for people. Come on, we're adding. What are we adding? We're adding 200 people a week, 200 people a day. I mean, some crazy number. Dallas Fort Worth is expected to grow by another 1.5 million plus in the next decade. you know, one of the fastest growing metro areas in the country, if not the fastest, you know, and we're at 7.5, jettisoning to 9, you know, so yeah, I get it. The Great Resignation is, if you Google that phrase, you will see all kinds of online data about it because of the pandemic and people's ability, like you, Chris, that now corporations have figured out, you know, butts in seats does not mean productivity, and people can live anywhere they want as long as we get the work done. What do we care? And now your generation. So yeah, I'm super envious of your generation because of the opportunity and your collective wisdom. And I'm not judging people that choose to stay in a city. If that's what people want to do, I still don't personally understand anybody that would be in Silicon Valley, but to each his own, right? So bang for the buck and quality of life and all that. But the fact that a 33-year-old guy, a 32-year-old guy at the time, you know, can come to the conclusions you have is pretty impressive. Just pretty impressive.
It's very impressive. And you know, we talk about the remote worker thing. The people that don't or didn't adopt that, I call that the farmer mentality. Randy, you're not going to do a good job unless you're there at 8 a.m. and you check out at 4:59. And I don't know about you, Chris, but my phone rings after 4:59 every day. And Randy, I know yours does too. You know, that was the farmer mentality. You had to show up at this time and you had to leave at this time. And you didn't show up and sit at your desk and like a good boy, you weren't doing your job. Not exactly how it is, right, Chris?
Right. I mean, you're exactly right. And you touched on it before about the internet. If we didn't have some sort of quality internet around here, I would never be able to move here in the first place because I need that. But from that angle, you're exactly right. There's no longer it's called AIS, but the A is a slang word for butt. So we'll say butt and seat. That mentality is kind of gone by the wayside. And what people are recognizing, and it really takes a sense of self-restraint as well to stop the burnout, because you could just sit here and work all day and burn yourself out. But if you have the self-restraint to not do that, what employers are finding is that people are happier, they're more productive. You know, they're having meetings during lunch while they're just eating at their desk, but that's cool because then they get off at 4:00 and they're okay. They're finding that the mentality of, well, if you get your work done, then we don't care where, when, or how you do it. And it's not even the work from home generation, it's the work from anywhere generation. I have people that are constantly on the road. They work out of, you know, they're sitting at a beach somewhere. Yeah, I got my laptop with me. I'll take these calls today. You know, it's a very internet connected generation that is exploding this new style of workforce.
The Wall Street Journal had an article this weekend about how the U.S., which they're not always positive on what we do, but the Wall Street Journal said that the U.S. business environment had literally nailed the COVID response. We were flexible. We pivoted. We shut down when we had to. We opened back up when we, and you know, within argument, you could say, yeah, some of that's right, some of that's wrong. But the bottom line is, I think our world has changed forever. I don't think we'll see things like they were ever again. And I voiced this just outside on the back deck one day when we were talking about being in a big city. We're all going to get in expensive steel boxes at 7:30 in the morning. We're all going to rush down crowded roads. And Randy, let me check. So 7.5 million people in Dallas, and we're going to add another 1.5. But traffic's going to be great, right? Yeah.
It's already great.
Yeah, when you have the people that are you're paying for the toll road, but you're sitting in traffic on the toll road. So what are you actually paying?
Yeah, that's right.
The privilege to sit on a toll road.
Yeah, basically.
How did your company's culture change, if any, during the pandemic, Chris?
They just went full remote. But since we're a software company, it's really not that different. We already had work from home days and things like that. So it really just became a complete pivot of, we don't no longer have to come to the office, but you know, we need to make sure you get your work done. And they quickly realized that, hey, you know, nothing's really different here.
Well, and the savings to infrastructure, I mean, I can tell you in Dallas-Fort Worth, you know, commercial real estate is, if it's not already suffering, it's going to, because that's a huge, huge expense. How do you feel the current debate, and this may be an unfair question, so you can feel free to blow me off if you want, But, the current debate is, well, if you live somewhere where the cost of living is cheap, then, we shouldn't have to pay you the wages that we pay, your cohorts they're trying to figure out a way to survive in San Francisco.
I think it's absolutely asinine to think that somebody should get paid less for a similar role anywhere. Just because I chose to live in Arkansas, where the cost of living is cheaper than Dallas, doesn't mean I should get paid less than my colleague that still works in Dallas. It just doesn't make sense.
I agree.
We're not going to pay you less. We're just going to pay them more. Okay.
Well, I will tell you what we told your dad. We're all capitalists here, unapologetically so. So, yeah, I agree. But it is a debate, and it's one that I think is going to continue to rage. Well, and we do have. I'm curious your perspective as a younger person, and I want to be respectful of your time and not overstay our welcome here. But I'm curious because of your age and because of the big decisions that you've made and the investment that you're making in your time and your money. This leadership gap that we are suffering, because we're baby boomers. Dennis and I are baby boomers. And as the baby boomers are exiting work, well, not everybody is. I'm not. Dennis isn't. Your dad isn't. But largely as a generation, we are. And there's this leadership gap. Mm-hmm. And everybody from Harvard to you name it, to Stanford and anybody in between understands that's a real gap. Yeah. That's a real gap at corporate level. It's a real gap in many areas. The expertise, the experience, the maturity, the insight is rapidly going away. And it's an enormous gap that perhaps has never existed in history before. As a young person coming up, mm-hmm. what's your perspective about all of those? And
so, for one, people are retiring much later than they used to. So that's already, causing a little bit of strife. Your generation is staying longer than the previous generation stayed for them. On top of that, I will say that there's kind of this, I don't want to share what I know mentality. I've experienced it from some senior leaders, and I think that's probably feeding into this overall problem as well, is that the senior leadership from your generation is hesitant to share that knowledge with somebody, underneath them, to even do basic succession planning, because they're afraid once I do that, you're just going to fire me, or you're just going to somehow get me to exit in some way. And I don't want to do that. So I think there's this kind of like, no, it's mine and I'm going to hold on to it. And because of that, when they do end up leaving on their own terms, the person that needs to succeed to that role is less equipped than they should have been, because they were never, I guess, graced with the sharing of the knowledge. So I think that's a huge gap that people need to understand exists, and we need to do better as a corporate community and across the board of preparing the next wave through succession planning.
How can we close that gap? Any suggestions?
Good question.
Ask the leadership coach in the room, who's constantly telling people not to do what you just said, by the way.
If Harvard can't figure it out, then how am I supposed to do it from sitting at my desk?
Oh, I have the answer.
Because you and I both know that we're boots on the ground is where we're going to solve these problems. Harvard ain't going to solve it.
Absolutely.
Sorry. I mean, the big financial fund that is Harvard University is not going to solve this problem.
The multi-billion-dollar endowment that's buying huge corporation pieces of land in California. Yeah. That's educational, or okay.
Well, legacy is really the thing. And I'm the old guy who's desperately trying to pass on and pass forward and propel the next generation. Of course, I'm biased. I've got a 40-year-old son who owns a business, a home inspection business here in Dallas, Fort Worth. So I'm very vested. Yep, he's substantially older than you are, but substantially younger than me. Why would I not want him? Why would I not want your generation, to excel? I think the fascinating thing to me, and this pertains to the village, is that exclusivity and the thought that by sharing that I give up something, that I lose something, when the reality is you gain so much more. Correct. And so do they.
Well, there's a term for that. Let me think. It's called petty. Yeah, that's it. It's petty. Seriously, if I am so petty to think that I'm diminished by sharing my knowledge with you, Chris, or with you, Randy, or with anyone younger, if I think that I'm going to be diminished, I must not have really much wealth or value at all if I can literally give it away in a few sentences. Wow. Maybe I'm not bringing value to the table at all anyway.
No, but a lot of people do believe in the whole scarcity mindset, which Chris's generation is blessed to not be so cursed. You know, we grew up, Chris, in a zero-sum game, right? I win, that means you lose. I mean, that's my only path to winning is you have to lose. And your generation didn't come up that way. Some of us who were taught that learned we're being lied to. We're just being lied to. Now, I'm as competitive as they come. But who's the competition? Well, I want to best the competition, but besting the competition in business means I got to outperform. But your generation understands that, and it doesn't mean that, I'm trying to sabotage them or anything. But, I mean, there is a truth to, the tide rising and all the boats rise with it. And I think the same thing applies to the village. As a person who's thinking about investing in the village and wanting to one day have a second home in the village. I got grandkids here, so I ain't leaving here. But I'm not going to do that lightly. And I'm not going to think about doing that if I feel like, the wheels are going to come off and the whole place is going to implode. But I happen to be pretty optimistic that people will figure it out. Cooler heads will prevail. Even on social media, they will get out shouted, which is what we're hoping to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm very optimistic as well, and I think that plays well into this board. The board is very optimistic, and maybe previous boards were more pessimistic, and that kind of led down different paths in itself. But we're all very optimistic that we can solve this. We can right the ship. We can solve it, and we're doing our damnedest to do that.
Chris, what do you see? What would you like to be? And this, Randy, this ties all this together. Chris, tell me 10 years down the road, 20 down the road, what's your legacy in the village?
My legacy in the village, man, that's such a loaded thing to ask. I really want to, and it doesn't even have to be attributed to my name because I don't care about that type of stuff, but I would really like to make an impact to where, one, we can create a better sense of accountability for where things go, but also by doing that and having a valid strategy or a well thought out long-term strategy to move us in a direction that we're no longer sinking money into just maintaining, but we're actually growing this place. We're making it better. We're creating I like to say a sense of community. Yeah, we all live kind of near each other and stuff, but the sense of community is just not quite there. And I would love to further embrace that and get that growing. And if those things, start to happen and we start to move this place into a more strategic direction towards growth, then I think I left my footprint, and it doesn't have to be, that's what Chris said. I just want this place to succeed and continue to flourish and grow.
All right. Are we ready for our lightning round? You got something else on your mind?
And by the way, I don't think that answer gets any better, Chris. That's an exceptional answer. I'll tell you the story. The three guys building the building or laying bricks, and they asked the first guy what he's doing. He says, "I'm laying these stinking bricks for $9 an hour." They asked the second guy, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm making this wall as straight as I can." They asked the third guy, "What are you doing?" And with tears in his eyes, he said, "I'm building a library for my grandchildren." What are we doing?
Yeah.
Lightning round questions, please.
All right, this is fun. This is a fun thing, Chris. All right, so real quick. Hiking, boating, golf, or tennis?
Boating.
Hamburger or taco?
Tacos.
Beaches or woods?
50-50.
Comedy or mystery?
Comedy.
Appetizer or dessert?
Appetizer.
And what is it?
The appetizer of choice?
Yeah.
Southwest egg rolls.
Oh, look at him.
It does
Dress
sound good.
There's a Plano boy. Dress or casual?
Casual.
Reading, watching, or listening?
Reading.
Stripes or plaids?
Stripes.
Favorite movie?
Ooh, I gotta go with Thomas Crown Affair, Steve McQueen.
Oh, there you go.
Wow, a classic. Wow.
Favorite musician or band?
Favorite musician or band? So I'm really a huge fan of Dave Grohl, but I would say that my favorite band is actually Black Sabbath.
Man, going old school. Okay, what was the first concert you ever went to?
First concert I ever went to, it was this metal band out of Finland called Sonata Arctica. And I snuck out of the house, went with my friends on a school night.
And you were how old?
Metal band. I was probably 15, 16.
Man, a Finnish metal band.
Yeah, they rocked it out. They played over at the Majestic in Fort Worth.
Oh yeah, there you go. There you go. I like it. I like it. Thanks for being with us, Dennis. I'm gonna let you take us home.
I'll tell you what, thanks for being with us today. Chris Jones, son of Mark Jones, but in his own right, his very own.
Greg Jones.
Who's Mark Jones?
Mark Jones.
What did I say? What did I say?
You said Mark.
No, I didn't say. I said Greg. Okay,
no, yeah.
He was thinking Mark Jacobs. He's thinking about his
That's
next style.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. You know, it's not a good episode unless I mess up, right?
No, Randy? There's got to be a blooper. We always have to include a Dennis.
You had your. Oh my God, this is the very first blooper we've had with you, Randy.
I kind of did it on purpose because I was.
Oh yeah. Well, I was messing mine up. I was messing mine up on purpose too. Yeah. Anyway, Dennis Simpson, Mr. Randy Cantrell, Mr. Chris Jones, and from the board. And it's been an absolute pleasure having you, Chris. I hope we can have you again someday and ask you about other contemporary topics.
For sure.
Yeah, we need to have you peck on those keys and that drum kit after you get your skills back in shape.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Tell us when you've completed that, learn how to play the keyboard 1, 2, 3 thing again. And then we'll call you, drop my dolly in the dirt or something. Okay.
I'll play chopsticks for you.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks for listening to another episode of Hot Springs Village Inside Out, a podcast where Hot Springs Village, Arkansas is the star. Please subscribe to the podcast. You can do that by visiting our website, hsvinsideout.com, and tell a friend.